Okay. Thrilled to be here with Theodore. He's our tech genius from ContractPodAi, who's back to do another topic with us today to kick off this new year strongly. The topic today is seeing more and achieving more, drive contract visibility and empower legal and broader enterprise. We will be leaving 15 minutes at the end for some questions, and Theodore and I will be available to answer your questions. But with that, to kick this off right now, I'm going to kick it over to Theodore to get going. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. It's a pleasure to be back. And hello, team. This is Theodore from ContractPodAi speaking. Like Colin mentioned, the theme today is going to be discussing how, through the ContractPod platform, we can help drive visibility across in-flight transactions and existing contracts across your enterprise, but also connect the vital legal function with other arms of the business. And in other words, doing more with less. Hopefully, instead of taking my word for it, you will get a clear impression after seeing the platform in action. And with that in mind, welcome to the platform in question, the ContractPodAi cloud system. A few comments just before we dive into the theme today. The ContractPod Cloud platform is entirely online hosted as a software as a service platform, meaning no local installations are necessary when we consider deploying this tool across different areas of the organization, and particularly tackling the bodies of work where legal is involved, along with other arms of the business. With today's theme in mind, the very first thing that I wanted to share with the group would be our recent updates to the smart repository that you gain by partnering with ContractPod and using the cloud platform. There are two areas that help attorneys and legal teams get their bearings across key trends or finding specific references within the contracts managed inside of the ContractPodAi platform. In no particular order, we'll begin with the smart repository. And this is where a user within our tool, based on their roles and permissions, would have access to the various agreements inside of our tool. A big part of our recent updates to this area of the platform have been in the spirit of giving a user more control over identifying key trends and sharing that information with pertinent stakeholders without having a data science degree. And part of how we accomplish this is not only giving access to users to all agreements and documents within the repository, but you'll notice that the software is displaying key attributes when initially loading this page. These attributes are something that are firmly within my control as a user within the system, and this helps me with a couple of clicks select additional attributes or data points that might be of focus based on what I'm researching or what leadership has tasked me with understanding. And I could supplement this initial grid with additional attributes that are top of mind. For instance, the commercial milestones for these contracts, the effective date and expiration dates, so I could be proactive with managing the associated next steps, as well as other key details such as the overall spend with the agreement and other data points that your organization defines when migrating those agreements into the smart repository. The impact of this is I, as a system user, could very rapidly supplement the initial list with those key details that are top of mind. And I also am able to then filter across those attributes within the repository to begin identifying my next steps. In other words, me creating a view of all active agreements on file of a particular type with a certain relationship in a given time frame is a question of clicks and seconds as opposed to something more onerous. Based on this filtered list, not only do I have flexibility in terms of the data points that are being displayed, but I could also update the visualization towards my preferences, whether it's creating a folder view of all agreements on file between us and a certain counterparty, or other attributes such as a tile of all relevant information so I could glean the key attributes at an eye's glance and hit the ground running with next steps. I think what's powerful here is not only does a non-technical user able to interact with the platform to identify some of these key themes. But from here, I could very easily manage the associated next steps for the agreements that I'm seeing on this grid, share some of these views for further reference so I don't need to reinvent the wheel, and share these views with other system users to drive alignment in terms of the trends that we're seeing, so we can make an informed decision together about the appropriate next steps. Another opportunity that this area of the platform gives attorneys and other legal professionals is the ability to set up the infrastructure for future reporting and searching after the fact. A downside with a lot of traditional systems is unless you pre-treat information in a particular fashion, it impairs your ability to then consistently refer to that data in the future, whether searching or reporting using traditional systems. A comparative benefit with the ContractPod platform is that based on this organic filtering and sorting, I have an opportunity to very quickly categorize related records with labels to signpost for key themes after the fact. And these labels are searchable and reportable within the ContractPod repository. So not only can we tag things in advance for record keeping purposes, just like with traditional tools, but a new opportunity is that legal teams and operations professionals can apply labels for key reporting and searching after the fact, helping you be more nimble as opposed to reactive with these transactions moving forward. Quickly checking the chat over there, and doesn't seem any questions have come in so far, but team, please do not hesitate with asking those questions, and we'll circle back with clarification or follow-up information as needed. The other area of the smart repository that I wanted to share with the team today would be what we call the cognitive search tool. And this is powered by our artificial intelligence to crawl through the unstructured data within this repository if you're looking for something specific. It all begins with a search term that's top of mind. For instance, I as an attorney want to understand my disclosure obligations for certain agreements that we have in effect. As I begin to type in that search term, you'll notice that the software is suggesting options as we go along. To quickly explain, this is different from a keywords-based search like Google, where those would have been previous searches of mine. Instead, that is the artificial intelligence recognizing and alerting me that those different references exist within the database in some way, shape, or form. This already helps attorneys and legal professionals find references that don't match the key terms they're using exactly, as well as permutations of what I'm looking for. So think misspellings or related terms, all captured in one single search. Additionally, because we're using the artificial intelligence to help find these terms within the database, the artificial intelligence is able to comb through the metadata associated with the agreements we have on file, but also in line within the contracts and supporting documents themselves. That is because every single digital file that is uploaded to the ContractPodAi repository is fully indexed and OCR'd by our technology, which lets you find those references in line within agreements, regardless of file format. PDFs, Word documents, or even images are fully indexed and scanned using our native functionality. As a system user, to supplement my search, I could leverage these logical parameters to get very granular with the data that I'm referencing. And otherwise, I'm able to toggle and leverage these filters to get very granular with the results I'm pulling as part of this search. The magic happens when I click this button to run the search that's top of mind. The artificial intelligence will comb through the entirety of the database and will produce a table of preliminary results for my review. Just like with the earlier area of the smart repository, I can easily supplement the details that are initially displayed with other attributes without having to rerun the search. So can be nimble with identifying the information that's key as part of this search, so then I can react accordingly. If I click into one of these results, you'll notice that not only does our software steer you into the direction of where that reference was found in line within a contract or document, but in comparison to a lot of other systems, this is not an excerpt of the result where the onus is on you to go out of your way and dig deeper, but rather this is the full document in question, so I have visibility into the preceding and succeeding areas to make an informed decision about what I found and what needs to happen next. This area of the platform shines when we're talking about helping attorneys find references for something you're working on currently in a very rapid fashion. But I think also brings a lot of value for net new resources that are new to your organization. It often takes a lot of time to ramp up and onboard paralegals and attorneys based on precedent, historical transactions, and really getting familiar with your firm's preferred positions across various agreements. A tool like this can help a new resource with access to the system get their bearings on specific references from legacy transactions, help them identify precedent based on negotiating positions for certain clauses, and then share these types of findings fluidly across different areas of the business to drive alignment about what we're seeing and a cohesive strategy in terms of next steps. This also helps organizations identify key themes at large, so they can then react when priorities shift or important updates occur across the world. To volunteer an anecdote, we recently helped an organization initiate a repapering exercise because they didn't have good visibility into which existing agreements were affected by a legislative update. So by using a tool like ContractPod's platform, we migrated the impacted contracts into the database, used the search to identify all agreements containing outdated language, and then from the resulting list, very quickly downloaded all the affected contracts and initiated a repapering exercise to get that organization back on track. And in short, that's our vision for all the organizations here in attendance today, helping users accomplish these types of activities with clicks and seconds, as opposed to something that's more involved. With that aside, I hope that you've seen how one of the immediate benefits of using a CLM like ContractPod system is the smart repository that empowers system users to very rapidly identify trends, communicate their findings internally with all affected stakeholders, to then hit the ground running based on the transactions we've managed in the past. But to switch gears a little bit, the next area that I wanted to focus on is how the ContractPod tool can help legal teams manage net new requests, whether it's authoring agreements on your company's templates in an automated way, or leveraging the artificial intelligence within our system to help expedite the review of red lines, whether on your paper or a third-party agreement that you've received, for you to determine the appropriate next steps. As a system user, it all begins with me submitting a new request to accomplish something specific. And this is where, based on my roles and permissions within the software, the tool will present me with a list of contract types. And here I would simply select the agreement that I'm working on to get the process started. However, a big part of what makes ContractPod different is we are very passionate about not over-engineering a solution. And what I mean by that is, while we have the built-in functionalities to submit a request as a system user, we at ContractPodAi appreciate that this platform has to cooperate and work well with existing tools that you might have in circulation. And so why I bring that up, one of the key functionalities for the audience to appreciate is our integration first philosophy. that helps you retain your existing infrastructure while still benefiting from the ContractPodAi system. And so with the current example, I wanted to take the opportunity and highlight how through the Outlook integration, I could very quickly take the file that I've received in my inbox and convert this into an official request within the ContractPodAi tool. For me, this is actually a very simple activity where after receiving a request with all pertinent information directly in my inbox, I'll benefit from the ContractPodAi plugin you see on the right-hand side of the Outlook screen. This helps me very quickly categorize the associated record based on the information that was provided to me by the requester. These intake forms that are presented within the plugin are fully configurable by your organization. So you would have full flexibility at defining the questions posed and can make these questionnaires as simple or extensive as needed for your processes. After keying in the moving parts, I can then quickly attach the file that I've received along with any pertinent commentary. Click this toggle to have the artificial intelligence begin reviewing the agreement and determining the key risks within the contract. And just like that, I've submitted a request within the ContractPodAi tool, which will invoke the associated workflows and automated notifications that you configure within the platform. Now that we've submitted that request through the Outlook plugin, let's quickly take a look at the output within the system. As we upload agreements within to the ContractPodAi platform, ContractPodAi works with organizations to identify the key risks that legal teams pay attention to for certain contract types. Very similar to the clauses that you see listed on the leftmost column of the following table. Based on these key risk areas, we can steer our artificial intelligence to pay attention to that content within the document you've uploaded. And if you remember from the cognitive search area of the platform, this is not a keywords-based search where the tool will go to the aforementioned clause and extract the language as is. Instead, the artificial intelligence uses element classification and natural language processing to understand the intent of what's written within the agreement that's been uploaded. And in that way, it's able to catch barbed references that might be buried deep within the document as part of the extraction that you see on the screen. I like to think of this as an executive summary of the moving parts for the contract that I've uploaded. So I, as an attorney or non-legal resource, can very easily understand the material risks that are preventing us from accepting the current version as is, versus the language that complies with my organization's preferred positions and could be accepted without any further redlining. Then, for the benefit of system users and perhaps junior attorneys that are new to the organization, they would have access to this facilitated editor that guides you through the identified risks and equips you with the functionalities to make quick executive decisions and quickly convert this current version into a new draft that could be shared with the counterparty. With the document that we're looking on the screen, I know that, for instance, LIBOR is a superseded concept, and this is an outdated reference. So I, within the tool, can very easily strike out this clause and move on to the next identified conflict. From here, if I navigate to the amendment language, I can very easily replace what's written in this current draft with pre-approved verbiage from my organization's playbook. And in this way, during the first pass of red lines, quickly strike out the risks within the current version and replace that with move forward language with a couple of clicks. While I'm able to process these controlled edits within this environment, I always have access to make more substantive changes to the language using our built-in editor, or to accept the language as is before moving on to the next clause and quickly publishing my changes. After doing this and making the necessary modifications to the agreement using this tool, the artificial intelligence will re-rank the agreement, extract the updated language, and will re-compare this document against my organization's playbook as we go through the pre-execution process from initial draft all the way through the executed copy. This functionality often helps legal teams produce consistent negotiating playbooks across different areas of the business, simply by using the automation provided by the ContractPodAi platform. This helps eliminate the guesswork across different legal teams and drive consistency for all the agreements managed within the ContractPodAi platform. Further, from an operational perspective, this sets up the groundwork for us to then report on these trends. So then the legal team has more data to adopt a proactive, data-driven approach and advocate for the resources or changes they need to become more effective with every passing period. Once again, I hope this clearly illustrates how, by using the ContractPodAi platform, we can reap efficiencies and be more nimble, even with uploaded agreements that are risky for our organization. To bolster an earlier comment that I made, I wanted to very quickly go to the automated version history within our platform and download this associated Word document, because this gives me an opportunity to speak to one of our other integrations that I think is important for this audience to consider. And that's an integration with your existing productivity tools. In this case, Microsoft Office, but ContractPodAi also supports organizations that are on the Google Suite platform. This plugin helps legal teams and attorneys interact with the ContractPodAi platform without you going out of your way to log into the system itself. So, as I am reviewing an agreement that I've received, and if I come across interesting language that I haven't worked on before, I would benefit from the clause library to very quickly see my organization's preferred positions across different clauses that we have on file. Very similar to the playbook functionality they saw built into the ContractPodAi platform. And that way, not only can I understand my organization's preferred language, but this plugin equips me with the tool to very quickly replace the existing verbiage with move forward text in 2 clicks or less. Additionally, with this functionality, if I, as an attorney, negotiate something bespoke for this transaction, but feel this could be beneficial for the remainder of my colleagues for future negotiations, I'm able to write back to this clause library and make this an organic document that multiple teams can refer to when tackling their daily activities. From a collaborative perspective, we know that many organizations struggle with efficiently engaging the right stakeholders and subject matter experts for them to weigh in on these agreements and specific inline provisions. However, with a plugin like what you're seeing here, I, as a system user, will be able to interact with the ContractPod tool to mention my colleagues and ask pointed questions, receive their feedback on the question posed. And this dialogue is then synchronized with the associated record inside of ContractPodAi. So you have a paper trail of what was discussed by whom, what was volunteered, and what was the ultimate outcome to keep your program defensible and dispel ambiguity for every passing period in the future. Returning to the plugin, you might have noticed that I, as a system user, am able to interact with the repository to identify related transactions for me to glean precedent based on what it is I'm working. And finally, when the time is right, after making all the necessary changes, I'll be able to publish this updated draft to the existing record within our tool. Or if I was working on something beginning with the Outlook and Word tool, I can then publish this as a net new request where the ContractPodAi tool will then drive the associated workflows and notifications automatically. Regardless of where business and your daily activities take you through our integration approach and built-in functionalities, ContractPodAi has you covered. Switching gears a little bit, outside of the example of us uploading an agreement into the repository, we also help organizations automate the authoring of their agreements on their paper using a tool that we call Auto Contracting Desk. This is especially appropriate for the high volume but low complexity contract types that inundate many legal teams, such as confidentiality agreements. But this same functionality could also be used to tackle the medium to high complexity contract types where there's a lot of moving parts. To help show you this functionality, I wanted to share an example of me as a system user submitting a request to author an agreement on our paper. Mechanically, I'll select the master services agreement, and you'll notice then the software is asking me what it is I'm trying to do with the contract in question. In this case, I'll click this button to begin authoring the agreement and creating that initial draft. This is where the system user will be presented with the intake forms that I mentioned that will capture the salient details surrounding this request. Just to reiterate, like I mentioned earlier, your organization will have full flexibility at creating these questionnaires and making them as extensive or limited as necessary. But there are 3 things that I want you to remember as part of this functionality, because this could drive important features within our platform. First, from a record keeping and reporting perspective, this gives your team the opportunity to ascertain all relevant details for this transaction, which you can then search and report against moving forward. Second, I want to point your attention to this question here. From the requester experience, this is pretty straightforward, simply asking me to capture the spend associated with this master services agreement. However, behind the scenes at the workflow level, we're using our dynamic logic to implement a control where if this request exceeds a certain spend, this request will automatically follow a more stringent workflow. Anything under that threshold will go through a more typical process. That gives teams the opportunity to account for important conditions or approvals that might be associated with those agreements based on contracting attributes or details about the transaction. And then using the platform to help police the process and push it forward to the necessary stage, alerting the affected stakeholders in an automatic way that their approvals or oversight is needed for this transaction. All of that without your legal team lifting a finger. This helps recoup your team's bandwidth to focus on the content and the legal risks, while the software does the heavy lifting in terms of monitoring those conditions and pushing the process forward to the associated next steps. The final implication to these intake forms, which is especially important from an authoring perspective, is this gives your team the ability to curate a pointed questionnaire, account for permutations. So for example, if I say that this is a time-bound project, the questionnaire will update to then ask me to clarify the end date for the agreement. But if I say this contract is until completion of services, that irrelevant data point disappears. Speaks to how we could ask the important questions while still making this an intuitive tool for the requester to interact with. After selecting the scope of services and typing in the forecast for these resources in question. The magic happens when I click this button. Our tool will then take note of the details provided and will insert those data points into the associated areas of your agreement. But a more advanced application of this functionality is our ability to configure your templates so that the tool can automatically include entire clauses, remove entire clauses, or even manage portions of these clauses to build the right content based on the identified data in an automated way. This helps organizations often consolidate the multiple versions of a single contract template that they have in circulation, and instead makes this a more elegant experience where by asking discerning questions and capturing the answers, we can have the tool build the right initial draft without any manual intervention. From here, as an attorney or a contracting team member, this visual snapshot page will give me a summary of the moving parts and preliminary details for the agreement that I'm working on. A different way to review this information would go to the snapshot page, where I would have more visibility into the governing process, the built-in functionalities for me to manage the entirety of the pre-execution process, from red lines to e-signatures, and these different tabs for me to aggregate my findings and preserve them in the smart repository, so then we can search and report against these activities moving forward. But this example, I think, showed you how, based on your existing templates, we can configure the platform to ask discerning questions in a very rapid way, and then build that initial draft of an agreement with the right content without any manual intervention. So your team can then return this draft to the counterparty and manage the associated next steps. With this example in mind, I wanted to take the opportunity to highlight another integration before we conclude today. And this is an integration with other system tools that you might have invested in across your organization. With this example, we know that many legal teams support their colleagues within the sales department for routine contracting activities, such as confidentiality agreements at the beginning of a prospective relationship, or more substantive agreements, such as the master services agreement for any types of service-related projects. Instead of telling your sales team that they have to go out of their way to learn an entirely new tool to benefit from what you've seen during today's presentation, we're able to bridge the gap between the two systems in the form of the plugin that you see on the right-hand side. This empowers your sales team to interact with the legal and contracting teams in an elegant and automated way. With this example, I, as a salesperson within my existing tool, navigate to the relationship in question. And at the beginning of this relationship, for me to create a non-disclosure agreement, I go to the plugin, select the quick NDA option. And because Salesforce, in this case, warehouses all of the necessary data and attributes, you'll notice that I do not have to fill any information in. Instead, after a few moments, the two systems will synchronize. The record will be created within Salesforce. And I, as the salesperson, then have quick access to the initial draft of the agreement, can download the document and return it to my prospect. And should I receive a redline version or something that needs to be negotiated, I'm able to then upload the document that I've received to the associated record within Salesforce, which will synchronize with the ContractPodAi tool, alerting your contracting team through the automated workflows and notifications that I've alluded to. The same is true, perhaps, for some of the more complicated contract types, like the master services agreement that we mentioned a little bit earlier. So wanted to show the group what that experience would look like if we're submitting a request for a more complicated contract type. And this shows you how we can even meet you halfway instead of full automation or having an intake process within the ContractPodAi tool. We can present those pointed questions to the requester within other systems, capture the moving parts that would play a role for future reporting and searching, such as the rationale for this request and why I'm generating this agreement. But the rest of the functionality is the same with the earlier example. After populating the relevant details that your team defines and selecting the template that I need to create if needed, I, as a salesperson, walk away with that initial draft in a very rapid way. Visibility into the governing status to dispel ambiguity about who's involved, what's outstanding. And this is more of a self-service approach where instead of the bottleneck being a lack of visibility to legal's activities, I, as the salesperson, have that information at my fingertips, access to the associated document, and can fluidly interact with the Salesforce tool to give my colleagues in legal the information they need to hit the ground running with what's being asked of them. We've covered a lot of information during today's presentation so far, but to recap, we know that legal teams are being stretched thin and they're an important asset to various arms of the business. At ContractPodAi, we're very passionate about helping those users accomplish more without a data analytics degree. And you've seen how by logging into the tool, I can identify key trends and share that information with clicks and seconds, as opposed to a more exhaustive exercise. On an ad hoc basis, when we're managing net new requests or things for existing relationships, we can configure the artificial intelligence and backend to automate a lot of the moving parts, whether uploading an agreement to identify the inherent risks based on the content as it currently stands, or from an authoring perspective, setting up conditional logic so that after capturing relevant details, the software can build the right initial draft automatically without any manual intervention within your company. Let me take a pause over here and glance through the meeting chat. Doesn't look like anything's come up so far, but let me take this opportunity and Colin, based on the notes that we've hit today, anything top of mind from your perspective?
Just first of all, Fyodor, that's just an incredible distillation of the value that ContractPodAi brings to the market. And I know the real focus today has been on, the dashboard, the data, and then how it's best used. So just really quickly, I wanted to kind of make this kind of more kind of an informal kind of chat of my observations and kind of jump in and ask some questions. So just really quickly, I'm going to give an observation like about the integrations. So I've seen it on Outlook. I've seen it on Salesforce. What are some of the other integrations that are the use cases for some of these teams where they're looking at like getting the best value for what they're already existingly using, and then they're coming onto the platform for ContractPodAi? How do they kind of manage that process, and what are some of the other kind of tools that work together?
Excellent question. So Colin, today we shared our integrations and plugins from an intake perspective. So capturing needs from the business, converting it into a request within the ContractPod system because of the benefits that we've seen, as well as some integrations with the collaboration tools like Office and Word. So if you're on the go and need to interact with the ContractPod system, you're able to do so in a seamless way. The other integrations that commonly come up as we consider deploying this tool for a particular organization would be integrations with downstream or upstream tools that are being used by other stakeholder groups. I commonly think about how members in procurement interact with legal for their contracting needs. And we have comparable integrations with procurement tools to post and pull data make sure there's no gaps in information as different departments are involved within a single activity, as well as integrations with other areas of the business. So with compliance adherence and compliance tools, or even downstream to your partners in delivery, so they understand what is included within a purchase order or an executed agreement, the specific scope of services that they're on the hook to deliver, and then seamlessly interacting between these different tools so that instead of a user going out of their way to book a meeting with procurement and discuss something top of mind, for us to fluidly share those attributes and data points using our RESTful API integrations in addition to what we've seen today.
Now, so are you like a ContractPodAi or the user? Are you able to take that data from the other systems and present this? Because one of the things I noticed on the front end, was you call them attributes. So it's almost like with the AI for all the documents, you had the attributes of the whole world, right, of what you're going to search, and it was up to you to kind of turn those on if you wanted to give yourself a focus of what you're looking at. So I'd imagine like pulling from a procurement system, you're seeing a lot of third-party agreements, right? If you're working with Salesforce, you're kind of seeing kind of what the sales profile, what they're covering. I'd imagine on a finance team, you're looking at, approval routes, of limits on contracts. Can you distill all this with the ContractPodAi system to kind of give you a kind of 360 view of everything hitting legal? So you're making kind of those decisions when you're kind of reviewing a contract?
You hit the nail on the head, Colin. Absolutely correct. So not only are we able to create those data points within the ContractPod system so that we don't lose sight of any important moving parts, but a big difference between ContractPodAi's approach and other vendors on the market is that we don't consider ourselves a vendor, but more so a partner with our clients. And the distinction that I'm trying to make there as an assurance, Colin, is that with many systems like this, your teams will receive training on how to create those data points and perform the mapping exercise. But ultimately, the onus is then on you to make it happen and to bring life to the platform and drive the outcomes that are important to your organization.
And a question on the organization. Can anybody in the organization view this document?
That's entirely up to you. And so to the earlier point, if I go to the administrative area of our tool, we're very proud to say that this was built on a no-code backend, meaning limited technical resources or lift from your colleagues in IT to fully assume the administrative responsibilities moving forward. This lets you set up and change things with clicks after a little bit of training. But Colin, what never goes away with ContractPodAi, in the spirit of a partnership approach, is that our clients gain a dedicated team that works with them to understand the key information across different systems, support the configuration of the platform during the initial project. But then, in contrast to a lot of other providers, that dedicated team never goes away. So while you have the tools and the access to make those types of changes and map the relevant data across systems, at ContractPodAi, our dedicated team can certainly support your organization with spearheading that effort at no additional cost to your organization moving forward.
So I'd imagine you see this, and I've seen it in multiple companies, that you have like a non-technical user per se, is in there, and traditional systems, you're like reaching out and you have got to get code for a simple workflow or a simple configuration. You're saying this non-technical person that's administrating the system can reach out to your team and kind of help you kind of configure on the fly what needs to be done for the organization.
That's completely right, Colin. So instead of me submitting a request and then having to wait on the work to be performed by the vendor, which results in downtime and impacts the productivity, if I have access to the administrative tool, I, as a system user, can very quickly make the changes necessary as requirements shift or new needs surface. So with this limited example, me creating a new data point for reporting purposes, you will notice that it's a series of decisions that are prompted by the software. I could still benefit from some of the advanced features in an intuitive way, but me creating a new attribute for reporting is as simple as following the on-screen prompts, tying this to as few or little contract types as necessary.
Got it.
Before moving on. And all of this was done in minutes and seconds, as opposed to change orders and days.
Wow. So let me ask a follow-up. So is this like your best practices kind of built with, assisted AI to get to the point where you're at right now, to be able to kind of look at this, kind of move quickly, and or is there like, hey, what if you have individual use cases that doesn't fit into this box? Is that something the team would assist with?
Completely right, Colin. So those new shifts or new needs happen all the time. And the power of our software is that it's really flexible. And if we're deliberate about how we configure it, it can be a useful tool for a lot of different areas where legal is involved outside of contracting. For example, setting up a process to capture requests and concerns, and then treat that information consistently and report against that activity so we could understand where legal is involved, even if it's outside of contracting. We are up for the challenge. So if you have any type of headache that could benefit from a smart workflow, rigidity in the intake process to capture the relevant information, and then a smart repository for you to learn from those activities and be able to then share those insights with other colleagues, whether it's contracting, conflicts of interest disclosures, legal intake, or other use cases. We help you bring that to life with our software instead of the onus being on you to get creative and to make it happen on your own.
So I would say like this is captivating, right? I wanted to jump into another thing that captivated me as well was the editor tool on the clauses. So when you clicked on that LIBOR clause in the demonstration, there was a whole list. If you could just do that for visualization purposes while I ask you the question, it was like you could go in and alter the playbook on the fly for that LIBOR clause, right? Or you could look at the playbook and you could actually pull clauses that have been seen before. Is that correct?
Completely right. And in fact, let me find a different
in the middle
visual.
of a negotiation, right? So
you hit the nail on the head, Colin. So in terms of benefits, I think not only does it rapidly identify the risks, ergo my priorities for an agreement that I'm working on, but with that facilitated editor, this is a wonderful mix of consistency and control versus flexibility. So to build off of what I shared earlier, you're completely right that if I'm reviewing a particular risk, I can edit the extraction or edit the language that currently stands using our built-in functionalities. But what we haven't discussed or shared is that each of these different functions can be hidden behind the roles and permissions within our software. So during the first pass of red lines, we can set up the tool to where it automatically replaces non-compliant verbiage with move forward language from your playbook without you clicking a button. But then
so let me just jump in there because this is fascinating to me, right? For the negotiation purpose. And it's like a user who I've used contracts before, like, so you could have like you could have some internal folks that are just kind of new in, you could limit the permissions for them. So they're just using a playbook. But if you have some more senior people, you can give like, hey, mark as a complaint, accept the risk, different parameters, right? Where you could move it. Now, the one question I have where I see a bit of a gap here, and you're probably going to solve this, is like, sometimes you have commercial teams, and then on commercial teams, you could have like 4 to 5 variant interpretations of a clause. So you have more senior people say, hey, this is a clause I would use for this type of agreement. Are you able to somehow kind of capture, the past agreements that were accepted clauses, right? So if you have different teams working in different silos, being able to look across the whole commercial outlet, it may not be just commercial, but it may be procurement for types of agreements and say, well, this is language we've accepted before. Just something to kind of elevate that discussion and, be efficient and, hey, I can accept this because I know my boss has accepted this risk earlier. Is that something you get to quickly?
The immediate answer is yes. A few different methods on how I could accomplish that. I could certainly go to the cognitive search to understand what is the finalized language for all of those contracts that we have on file. But I wanted to take this opportunity perhaps to share the custom report builder, because that's a report that I could build to pull the executed language across all agreements very quickly. Access to this report builder, once you have access to the backend, you will be able to set up reports to your specifications with a few clicks or less. Wow. I can quickly categorize this report so my colleagues understand what it's for and what it's tracking. Associate this report with as few or as many agreement types as applicable. In terms of the data that I could filter by, very similar and as robust as the smart repository, allowing me to do creative things such as building a report of all upcoming effective dates 7 months from now, or expiry dates, so then I could be proactive, prevent revenue leakage, and capitalize on some preferred rates. But in terms of the data that I could pull from the software, these could be the record keeping details or elements from the intake of a process, key commercial dates that the artificial intelligence recognizes and extracts from those contracts, all the way down to your point, the language that exists under a certain clause for all agreements that we've managed in the past. Setting up this report is a question of clicks and seconds, and then clarifying a schedule. I can build a report to run on a series of cadences and deliver the results to system users or stakeholders outside of the platform. And instead of boring you with building a new report, let me take the opportunity to show you what that output could look like at the clause level. Actually, let me take that back. I think the team would appreciate how the sausage is made. We'll go through the custom report builder, and I'll build a report that tracks all the termination language that we have for certain agreement types. So here, just like instructed earlier, I'll select the contracts that I want included in the report, go down to the associated clauses. I'll bypass the schedule because that's something that I can read in the future. It looks like the software is yelling at me for not providing time. So let me save this quickly. And then in the report tool, let's take a look at the results together. And this is a little bit of what to expect if we scroll down. So the software can absolutely pull precedent from the agreements that we have in the smart repository. And I, as an attorney, have visibility in under 3 minutes to what positions we've taken in the past. So I can apply this to the transaction I'm working on currently.
That's so powerful. It's especially for training purposes, even in bigger corporations, right? Or if you're taking a secondee on, I just see so many methods where you could like have these pre-printed on contract types and just like, you know, hey, check out what we've agreed to before, refresh it, you're good to go, right? It's at your fingertips instead of diving through 30, 40 agreements. It's like right in front of you. You can copy and paste it, put it in your Word, negotiate, and you're done. I love it.
I think you've diagnosed that correctly, Colin. And in fact, I'll take it a step further. This facilitated tool is certainly beneficial to new attorneys or paralegals that are new to the organization. But this functionality helps even a non-legal person like me very quickly navigate to the risks, make executive decisions, create a new draft, and hit the ground running. So foolproof that even a person like me can use it. But we work with organizations to be deliberate because this is not intended to replace human interaction or attorneys' involvement with these agreements, but rather this is intended to be a supportive and assistive tool that helps you interact with the software to manage the necessary activities with a lot less lift compared to the current state.
Fascinating. So for the, just moving on a little bit, this is, I think we've hit home the point on this multiple times. Brilliant. But you know, for external reviewers in the Word integration, can they work on a simultaneous document as somebody internally at the same time? Is that possible?
No concerns from that perspective. Now, just to be clear, the audience for that word plugin would be people that also have licenses and access to the system. But there are no concerns with red lines being done in a mixture of different areas, whether you're using our built-in editor, leveraging the plugins, or a combination of the two. Our tool is able to support that mix and give you clear visibility in the audit trail to where a particular version came from, who was the author, date and timestamp, so you could understand how an agreement evolved, even if there were a mixture of environments used for that particular negotiation.
So it doesn't get confusing, right?
That's right.
So the next thing that really kind of stood out to me as well was your cognitive search tool. Could you kind of, in a summary, kind of summarize what that does?
That's right. So that's the AI-powered searching tool that is smarter than a keywords-based search to not only look for the words that you're using, but is trained to understand the thematic intent of what you're looking for and how it relates to legal concepts. So this is where I, in my tenure at ContractPodAi, have seen a lot of different versions of how HIPAA is spelled or how force majeure is spelled. And with a lot of traditional tools, if the words that you're searching for don't match the result exactly, you don't find that when you're reviewing the results. But with our tool, because of the element classification, it's smart enough to avoid those hurdles and still find the relevant content, even if it doesn't match your keywords exactly.
Let me ask that: how does the behavior learn from AI, or how does AI work? To ask it a different way, because I'd imagine you have multiple users, right? There's what information you're kind of feeding it to respond to, like, you know, the what if now then logic, right? Is it taken from all the systems and then like aggregate it and you can kind of pull all that information out, or is this a self-learning usage from your work?
I wish we could take full credit for this, but our AI capabilities come from a mixture of different places. Behind the scenes, our initial technological partners are Microsoft Azure and formerly Watson. And we chose those partners because they had extensive data sets of agreements across the globe and different contract types. So that was a big part of the initial training for the artificial intelligence in question. Now, over top of that, ContractPodAi, based on our expertise and how we help organizations, we've built training on top of that to refine the AI past the initial data set with our lived experience in helping organizations over the past couple of years. So it's a mixture of using the best from organizations that already exist with an extensive data set and our experience with companies recently where we work on their unique agreements, clean up the data just to make sure that it could be repurposed for the benefit of other organizations. And those are the primary two training methods for the artificial intelligence, whether it's searching or our capabilities with the upload example.
Kind of helps eliminate the guesswork, creates a consistent data-driven approach, improving efficiencies.
Said better than me.
I like it. I do have one other question. We talked about the cognitive. What else did we talk about? You have to remind me here. External reviewers. Okay, we talked about that. I'm just looking at my notes. We talked about attributes on data points. Then we talked about non-technical users being able to work with your teams. Ability to set up infrastructure for reporting. Okay, we talked about that. Categorize with labels and make them searchable later. So the legal teams can apply labels for quick search. So if you're working on the fly and you're like, hey, we need to categorize something that's not caught already, you have the ability to kind of go in and just like tag that so it's a searchable term later on.
That's right. You hit the nail on the head.
So the other things I took notes on were what kind of really kind of stood out to me was, what are the other use cases that you're kind of seeing on the market, like that, that folks are kind of looking for when it comes to using the data? The reason I'm asking this question is because there's folks going to be watching this. There's like, wow, I've got my set of, we only know what we know, right? So
yeah,
it's like, what else could I be using it for? So what I really want to do is kind of get to the crux of, there's 20 different use cases you could be getting value or garnering value from the ContractPodAi database, and that information, those data points from the dashboard. Is there something else that one enterprise might be doing over, a mid-tier company? Have you seen anything?
absolutely. And Colin, I appreciate that context that you volunteered, and I'll echo the same thing. With the conversations that I've had recently, not only is it important for a tool like this to help make your life easier for agreements, but it would also be great if this tool can help me out with other areas where I'm involved in outside of contracting. And what this means for our potential clients is that with a single partnership and a single vendor, we can get creative in building purpose-built applications, tackling other bodies of work using our core functionalities, such as the workflows, the intake forms, and the reporting that we've discussed today. To illustrate a little bit of what's possible, just to get the juices flowing, if I go to this table, this is where we've created those purpose-built tools for other use cases outside of contracting. I think this gives good visibility into some of our recent conversations, but certainly this is not exhaustive. So if you could think of challenges when it comes to finding the right policy or standard operating procedure for your daily activities, or maybe it's setting up a process and something that's repeatable and scalable for capturing questions from the business or potential concerns that should be managed in a certain way, all the way down to perhaps the riskier activities, such as having a paper trail for litigation needs and a smart process to engage the right people at the right time, depending on the matter or what's been escalated. I think this gives you some preliminary visibility, but Colin, go ahead.
So I love this, because this is this is even beyond your contract management process and your whole like end-to-end process. Maybe it's on Salesforce, maybe it's on Outlook. It's your ability to kind of do a deeper dive. But you're saying that you can put workflows together, and if you can imagine it happening in your park, like approval routes, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, what if in now logic somebody needs to approve, automate the process, and then you can still garner that data and keep it in the same system for viewing later on. So you're keeping full track of it. And then you have let's say for the simple legal team use case that they're working in different silos. You might have IP, you might have commercial, you might have privacy, you might have compliance, trust and safety. They all have their different avenues, but you can keep it all within the system. If there's different workflows, the documents are coming in, you can keep them in the system in the repository, you can track them, and then you can actually see a workflow and dashboard for your organization tailored to you if you need to see it. So you don't have access to everything if you don't need it, but you can have access to your kind of workflow and keep a running checklist. That's fascinating. Is that what you're offering?
Completely correct, Colin. Well said.
Okay, I just wanted to put that out there so I understood it, and I think a lot of people will really, really appreciate it, because you've been the first contract management tool, and I don't think anybody's got these types of workflows built in. Like, so it's beyond just the CLM system. It's an enterprise system, right? End to end with workflow capabilities. Is there something I'm kind of missing as well, just to kind of highlight the ContractPodAi value?
I think you've captured it accurately and very well, Colin. Although our beginning was with the legal audience and really focusing on their contract lifecycle management needs, our capabilities are more extensive and robust than that, because legal was pulled into a lot of different directions for a given company and those daily activities. And so we've evolved past the CLM into using our core functionalities to tackle all the needed bodies of work where you might not have an existing tool in place or might not have the automation that really makes your life easier when managing multiple hats and different activities on your day-to-day. So no concerns with what you've articulated. And based on the theme of today's conversation, I hope the audience walks away with a clear impression of not just how we could help move the needle for existing contracts or legacy agreements, so we could learn from those things, but how we could get creative with integrating with existing tools so that regardless of where business takes you, you're able to benefit from the ContractPod system, to other use cases that might have not been discussed today.
Yeah. So just one more question before I give you the last word, and we tell you this, wrap it up in the above until the new year. But it's just like what I want to ask is, so we don't. Legal's evolving and it's growing, right? Like the GCs are becoming CLOs. There's different. It's getting spread thin more. So a lot of these workflows and a lot of these workflows are on the front end as well. It's like intake and triage, right? It's kind of spread out. Yep. So somebody in legal says, I want, and presses this button, new request. They can build that workflow for an intake and triage, right? To even start a process all the way into your CLM process. I know we could do a whole 2 hours on this ourselves, but it's like it's an expansive, efficient tool, and that's what I'm trying to hit on.
That's completely right. And as an added assurance, Colin, if I, as a system user, am trying to build a new process from ground up, I have the keys to do that within our no-code backend. But also wanted to highlight how I could quickly repurpose an existing process or workflow within the system. And instead of building something net new from scratch, very quickly make modifications to an existing workflow based on my needs. So it's a mixture of both, but ultimately you have the ability to build what you need with clicks and minutes without us holding you back. Or if you're managing competing priorities, that's when you could lean on the extended team that I volunteered earlier to make those changes for you. You will double check the work just to make sure it aligns with what you asked. No right or wrong answers to either approach. So whether you're autonomous or lean on us, we're happy to support moving forward.
So I would say with 100% confidence, having looked at the market for the past like 14 years, I'm just going to say it to folks out there, without a shadow of a doubt, if you're looking at from a features, UI, UX experience, really give ContractPodAi a really good look, because in my opinion, and I don't say this often, I'm agnostic to a lot of these systems out there, but this is some of the best technology I've seen, period, on the market. With that, I'll hand it off to Fyodor.
Colin, it's always a pleasure joining you on these, and so I'm thankful for the opportunity to join the audience today for today's presentation. Just to recap the notes that we hit today, scarcity is a big thing from the conversations that I've been having with a lot of organizations. Scarcity of time, but more importantly of resources. And based on today's presentation, the smart repository to help you make sense of what's existing, as well as arming you with the functionalities to find trends, share that information, and be more efficient with next year. The cognitive search tool that helps net new resources or existing professionals find buried references, make an informed decision on what needs to happen as a next step, as well as dynamic and repeatable processes for net new requests that we receive in the next calendar year, whether reviewing third-party paper and expediting the review of what's important so I can then reap efficiencies in the pre-execution process, or when it comes to authoring some of those agreements that hit my inbox that bog me down, leveraging automation for the tool to build the right draft the right way and only involving me when I'm needed or when something materially changes during red lines where I need to be involved to manage the next steps. Then when the dust settles on some of those contracting benefits, I think you see how by investing in a partner like ContractPodAi, we can then identify additional priorities, work with your team on getting creative and benefiting from what you've invested in to make a difference to other challenges where legal is involved.
Yep, I think with that, Father, we've crushed this. Our time has gone over. Thank you you crushed it, but thank you very much. Have a wonderful 2023, and very grateful for your time today. And there's so much to share with folks, and look forward to connecting soon. Thank you.
Sounds great. Happy holidays.